Hello and welcome to this brand new episode of the Silmarillion Film Project. I'm your co-host Dave Kale, and we have an incredibly exciting and busy episode tonight, and we're starting a little late, so I'm going to skip my usual rambling at the start and just start introducing folks. You can hear him laughing. He's here, as he always is. It's the Tolkien professor, Corey Olson, and the Tolkien maven, Trish Lambert, is here as well.
Shockingly, I'm not laughing. That's right.
Yes, that's true. But it's only a matter of time.
That's right.
But most importantly, we have three special guests who are really the focus of tonight. We have our writer's room, as it were, for the Silmarillion Film Project. We have our sort of like, I don't know which of you wants to be showrunner or maybe co-showrunners, but I'll just introduce all three of you. We have Nick, Marie, and Rhiannon. How are y'all tonight?
Hello.
Yeah, and I think Nick has been called off to a domestic situation. He's with his,
as he warned us he would be.
That's right. We have we're very parenting friendly here on some film broadcast, so it's all good. Whether one is parenting children or animals, nevertheless, sometimes these things happen. Anyway, so glad you guys could join us today. This is going to be a lot of fun, and not only, and this is I kind of want to just pause to recognize at the beginning what a big deal this is, right? Because we've done script outlines before. That's been a part of our production since season 1. We've been looking at after thinking through the all of the different episodes and everything and all the themes and ideas and discussing the concepts and the stories and things, to then have you guys are and Nick and Maria, I know you guys have been with us from the beginning, working with the help of others to formulate outlines, right? To give us a really clear sense of like the shape of these episodes and therefore the shape of the whole story of the whole season and how that would work. And it was always so much fun to kind of see that stuff really kind of coming together from the sort of ramblings that we do during our discussions as we go through. But of course, this year, for this season, we have something entirely different and really exciting, which is actual full scripts for the first time ever. And that's kind of really amazing. This is just the very first thing I would want to say before we go any further and do anything else, is just how deeply impressed I am by not only the amount, but the quality of work you guys have done this year. This is amazing stuff.
So that's because Rhiannon joined the team, and she's our script writer, which is better than having a writing room. You have someone who actually writes scripts. So she's done awesome work, and we're really glad she was able to put this together. Yeah.
Yeah. This is really great. So you guys, Rhiannon, you were part of the discussion. So that you guys did the discussions like you did in previous years, and then Rhiannon, you went from, the discussions of the outlines to drafting the scripts. Is that how it worked?
Yes, that's pretty much what happened.
Okay.
So I discovered Film for the first time in like January of this year.
Mm-hmm.
Listened to every single episode and got caught up on it.
Awesome.
And then when I was caught up, I joined the discussion forums, and like a couple days after I joined, I saw a post for a script discussion, and I was like, well, why not? I could be part of this.
Yeah.
And so I sat in on the discussion, and going into going into the discussion, I did not have any idea that I was going to be writing scripts, but thinking about what we had discussed a couple days after our scripts discussion, I realized I was thinking through scenes and thinking about characters in a way that I could actually put it together and write a real script.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and I wrote the script for episode 4 because that was the first discussion that I was part of. And I got such wonderful feedback from that on the discussion boards that I thought I should just continue. And so I've tried to get a script for every single episode of this season, and I'm about halfway through one for episode 11 now, and still working on that, and we'll hopefully have it done by the time we're ready to talk about that one.
Excellent. Yeah, well, we still have several weeks before we get to that, I think. So yeah, we still have a little bit of lead time. Marie, is there a link that we could that you could post maybe for the scripts, so that I wanted to put it in Twitch because people in Twitch were asking if I could see the links.
Sure. It's also on that PowerPoint, but I'll give you the link.
Right.
What a concept.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, Rhiannon, these are fantastic. I have to admit, I was like completely drawn in, and was just really excited to see the stories emerge. And it was just, as I keep wanting to use words like incredible, not just because not out of a some kind of just like hyperbole, but because, as those of us, who have been working on film now for years, it's been more than 4 years. It's been, when was the date of our first episode? Does anybody remember? Like how long film has actually been going on?
You announced something at
Mythmoot 3.
Yeah,
right.
Which was in the winter.
So that was
2013? 14?
Would have been 14. Yeah.
14.
Or maybe January of 15?
Yeah, because the last Hobbit film
had
just come out.
Wasn't it? Because the Hobbit film came out in late
December.
14. Right?
Yes. Yeah, so January of 15.
And then we did it that spring. I think we kicked it off that spring.
Yeah.
So we announced it at Mythmoot, and then I think it was that spring.
Yeah, so we're 4.5 years basically at this point into the film project. So again, Rhiannon, I keep wanting to use words like incredible and everything because we've been doing this for 4.5 years, and I never really imagined that would happen. That we would actually have scripts. It's there's a kind of, it was just sort of amazing to read and sort of see that kind of reality, to the project, which is
And Professor Olsen suddenly realized just how lazy his scriptwriters have been up until this point.
There's no criticism of the work that had been done in the past. Just a wonderful and unforeseen addition, which was really cool. All right, well, I want to dig into the scripts and start talking in detail about the sort of the story production that you guys were doing as you went from our discussions in the earlier episodes that people have heard down to these scripts. But first, announcements, because this is a very announcement important time of year. So we have lots of announcements, and our announcements are the big announcement, of course, is that we are in our fall fundraising campaign right now. It is fundraising time at Signum University, the one time of year when I actually ask you for money instead of doing that all the time. I know I, am a supporter of some wonderful nonprofits that are like every single time they interact with me, they're begging me for money, which I know gets really old. So I try not to do that for Signum University, though we are a lovely nonprofit who does really need money. So fall fundraising campaign is when we do that. And we've got lots of stuff going on in our fall fundraising campaign this year. A bunch of events that are happening, of course, in 2 days. On October 5th is our Lotro Marathon. I do that every year. My 12-plus hour Lotro Marathon that I'm going to be doing starting at noon this coming Saturday on October 5th. There are some other events that we're doing. Our Mythgard Movie Club discussion of Pan's Labyrinth, a new Signum Symposium. That's tomorrow, October 4th, on Philip Pullman's Secret Commonwealth. We have, of course, one of our regional moots that's happening here in the middle of this, Middle Moot, on October 12th out in Iowa. And our big campaign finale on October 19th. But I want to draw particular attention to the State of the University address on October 7th. So that's next Monday, October 7th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to be talking about the future of Signum University. It's time for,
and it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
We're taking our next big steps. Signum is growing and expanding over these in this next year, and so I'm really excited to share the vision with people about where we're going and why and what we're planning. So So that's going to be particularly fun this year. So, and obviously, I just want to invite you, if you have been enjoying our broadcasts and everything that Signum has made possible, I hope that you will consider making a donation to support Signum University. Our donors have done so much, and we've accomplished so much with the help of our donors over the last 7 years or so that we've been doing. This is, I think, our 7th fundraising campaign. Yeah. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention about that, one of the things that I love to sort of give back to thank our donors for all the donations that they give, and we of course have our normal donor thanking system, right, where we have lots of different gifts that we like to give to our donors in gratitude for the donations that they give us, and you can find all of that information if you scroll down on that page, signumuniversity.org/fund. If you go there, you can see all the information about our donor reward program and stuff. But in addition, I'd like to do a separate giveaway for Silmfilm. Specifically. So if you are a Silmfilm listener and you either have a monthly donation that is running, or if you give a gift or set up a donation during the fall fundraising campaign here, just send an email to donate@signumu.org and let us know that you gave a donation and would like to be added to our drawing. We're going to be doing a drawing during the finale, during the October 19th campaign finale webathon that we're going to be doing there. And we're going to draw 3 Silmfilm participants who have made donations and sent an email to say they want to be entered into that drawing. And all of the all 3 will receive one of our Anytime Audit courses, so you can go through the Signum catalog and pick any course that you're interested in, you'll get access to the course materials of that course, and there will be a special grand prize to the grand prize winner. This is something we gave away before, and I want to give away again. And of course, our script writers will fully appreciate the value of the grand prize Silmfilm gift for the grand prize winner, and that is a veto
power.
Veto power, absolutely, yes. Unilateral veto power over any decision that the execs make that you hate. And we'll just have to deal with it. That's just, and obviously there will be some rational restrictions on this, you can't win the drawing and then be like, okay, so I want to do the version where Morgoth wins at the end. Like, no, like that's we're not doing that. But a reasonable veto over a decision that we make that you don't like. That's right. That's what you will get. And do keep in mind, with the entry to the asynchronous drawings, if you listen to more than one of our broadcasts, we're doing this for all of our broadcast audiences. You do have to choose one, because we're only one entry per person. So
you can't vote early and often, is what you're saying.
Yeah, early but not often. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. Anyway, okay, so that's just wanted to let you know that is what is coming. So we'll be doing the drawings on October 19th during the finale there. So please don't forget first to make your donation and then to send an email, donate@signumu.org, and we will do our drawing later on there. So
hey, I have a little PS that's kind of tangential to the annual fundraiser, and I was reminded of this today, and since we're on tape, I wanted to put this into posterity. I don't know that a lot of people know this, but the Amazon Smile feature, where you're able to click a nonprofit, to donate a piece of what you buy on Amazon to that nonprofit. Signum University is in that program.
We are, yes.
So, it doesn't cost you any more money, but if you chose to, if you don't already have a charity and you use Amazon, look it up, Amazon Smile, and you just, search on Signum, and there it is, and click it, and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's very and Bob Way's your uncle.
Bob Way's your uncle. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is. It's super. It's very simple and doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's good. It's good.
Okay.
Amazon Smile's a cool little program. Thank you for reminding me about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. All right. So again, thanks everybody for your donations, and we are excited about the future ahead of Signum here. But now let us get back to the exciting present, and that is our review of the scripts. So we do have, as Marie foreboded, the links for the script outlines and the scripts here. Yeah, there we go. I don't think I can actually copy them or something straight from here on my screen currently, but it's all good. There they are. Or you can navigate as instructed here along the top. Cool. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about episode 1. Tell me what were some of the challenges that you guys had. What was most challenging about episode 1? Did you guys feel when you were sitting down to try to sort of block all of this through and work it out? What was hardest?
Well, there's a few challenges in this episode. One is that you had requested that the main climatic awesome event of the episode not be shown on screen, which seems like an odd choice to us.
The actual dismemberment.
No, the entire rescue of Mydros, because you had requested that there be a time skip from Fingon sees Mydros on the cliff to they arrive on the Eagle with nothing in between. And we were puzzling over how that would read to the audience and what they might think.
What possessed us? Having read the script now, I'm like, what possessed us to do that?
No. You had your reasons, and the reasons were valid concerns about what happens when you show it to what the audience would see. So we kind of considered it, and we wanted to preserve the drama of the scene while addressing some of your concerns in the way we put it together. So we tried to have our cake and eat it too. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we succeeded is up to you to determine.
And of course, this is where I try to remember what my thought was played back when we talked about this, which was ever so long ago now.
We were mostly just hoping you'd forget about it.
Yeah, I understand.
Which is why she promptly reminded you for some reason.
Well, I think we were trying to keep in an element of tension, and we wanted it to be so that not only did the elves not know what became, but the audience didn't know either, kind of thing.
Well, I think that one of the things there was that I wanted the dramatic moment not to be. It is possible, of course, the taking Mydros off the wall and flying away with him on the Eagle, right? Could be the big moment. The dramatic moment that I wanted was the arrival, right. Of Fingon and Mydros, because I wanted the force of the action to. Basically, I didn't want that just to be. If the focal point of the episode is basically what happens in private between Fingon and Mydros, then that's where the emphasis is placed, right? I wouldn't want that episode, or that element, I guess I should say, of that episode to look like a buddy movie, right? It's about the effect on the community. That's the purpose of it, and that final arrival. Not to mention the fact that I actually think there's really, and the way that it came out I thought was pretty good, as far as the actual dramatic effect, the way that you guys had built up the conflict there between the two of them, and then the Eagle comes in, and then Fingon descends with Mydros in his arms, and I love the laugh. I forget who said it. It was one of the Feanorians who was like, he recovered Mydros' body for us. That was very kind. Right.
It was Crufin that said that.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I thought that seemed to me still to work really well in that way that I was thinking, right? That so that the focal point, the real dramatic action, is what happens when everyone's reunited, right? When everyone is brought back together, that moment in the large gathering of people was where I really thought that the dramatic climax of the episode should be, rather than the taking away by the eagle.
I loved having the audience find out, because I love, first of all, the scene where it cuts when he gets his sword, right? And you're like, oh, and he's saying, like, he leaves you with the impression that he's going to, like, off Mithros, right? And then we cut to Morgoth and then discover through Morgoth. So that means the elves still don't know, but the audience doesn't know. I loved that. I thought that was awesome. And then I absolutely had a picture of Morgoth throwing a dart at the orc. That was great.
What?
He throws the arrow as if throwing a dart and kills the orc. He killed the messenger, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I thought Morgoth would be the kind of Vala to do that. But, like,
absolutely,
just offing his
very
followers at random is totally something else would
and
do.
like you said, he kept talking to the orc even after he was dead on the floor, which is totally Morgoth.
Yes.
I loved it. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, some of the issues that, and I agreed with you that the focal point, like there had to be some doubt as to what was going on with Fingon and Mithros at when Thorondor shows up at the in front of the rest of the Noldor.
Right.
And I agreed with you on that point. I think that there is, it is very difficult to imagine this giant eagle showing up, right? But I thought it was also a great opportunity for us to address the whole, well, why don't they just have the eagles do it? Why don't they just have the eagles do it? Issue.
Right.
And have Thorondor address that verbally and specifically.
I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
I thought that was really
and also to address the idea that he is not a tame eagle.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
I like the idea of using Silmarillion film to grind your axe on the long-standing
yes
point of contention between Tolkien fans and the rest of the world.
Let's make it really clear from the beginning. Let's try from the beginning to make it really clear why that's such a stupid comment. Yes.
Yeah, like that the balance having wings issue.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yes, yeah. If you're gonna, let's as we continue through this process for the next 3 decades, let's keep updating our list of stupid things people think about Tolkien, and then knocking it off one at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the least we can do during the course of the run of Film, right? Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as far as the other thing, so Marie, here's a confession. When you were talking about leaving out the dramatic moment, or the dramatic moment happening off stage, the way that you guys handled it, which is, I thought very much in the spirit of what we were describing, really, is very little of the rescue did in fact happen. In fact, there's only one thing that happened off screen, and that's the actual dismemberment, the actual cutting off of his hand. All of the rest of it was even down to him chipping with his knife, trying to get the bracket off the wall, right? So there and the Thorondor showing up and everything. Anyway, so it's all there, right? So we do get the benefit of seeing Mithros and Fingon there, getting that whole, laying the foundation for the way that scene is an anticipation of, 2 really important scenes to come, when Beren and Luthien, and then with Sam and Frodo. So, we get all that, but we still get suspense as well, right? Suspense in because you don't know what's going to happen. And Trish, as you say, it looks like he might have to go back to Plan A, which was killing him.
Yeah.
Right. There were a few issues that you guys brought up that we endeavored to address by shifting the narrative slightly. For example, when it was brought up, Mithros begs for death, And then the eagle brings Finrod up, and Finn gone. Wow! Oh my gosh!
Well, no, that's so easy to do.
Yeah, up on the cliff, and then he tries to get the thing off, and so Maedhros begs for him to kill him again. And the way that we addressed that was by keeping Maedhros morose, keeping him sedate, like he doesn't. There's no excitement when Fingon is brought up there, because he knows there's no way that he's getting this thing off.
Yeah,
he's hopeless. Yeah.
No, that was good. I mean, of course, and even to the way in which those things kind of correlate. I mean, one of the things which this scene really foregrounded in a way which we have done, and I know this was an issue, of course, especially in season 3 with the, how do we show the hardiness of the elves surviving the Helcaraxa, right? And really kind of emphasize that. But just the ways in which elves are not like humans, right? So Maedhros surviving without sustenance for years on the cliff face kind of certainly foregrounds that, right?
Which was another issue that came up over the course of discussing the episode, because in my mind, I didn't want it to be clear at all that how long they were there.
Yeah.
Because the longer they're there, the weirder it seems.
Yeah.
There was discussion of, how much of a threat the Noldor camps feel like they're under.
Right.
How certain are they that they're going to be attacked if they go out in any significant numbers, for example.
Right.
And there was discussion about, well, if they're there for 5 years, then they kind of have to have like farming going on. And I said, no. You can't have like these quiet scenes of farming elves and have there be this kind of tension built between these two camps. Right. It destroys that tension.
Well, it is really one of the major challenges of the time scale, right? It's easy for Tolkien. So, I mean, Tolkien is doing two things, right? I mean, there are really two forms in which he wrote this narrative. One is in plot summary form, and the other is in annals, right? Like lists of years. And again, it's really easy to be like, well, this happened, and then 5 years later, this happened. Like that's easy to do when you're doing entries in the annals, right? It's much harder to actually kind of depict that on the ground. And with a lot of this stuff, he never did that at all. And of course, we know from his own experience, even just in the writing of The Lord of the Rings, when, sort of narrative push comes to shove, right? Time, making sure that the time frames all worked and that, there was enough time for everything to happen and things to happen logically was a major, issue of his, a major concern of his, as he was certainly during the Lord of the Rings process. It's not, obviously the Lord of the Rings story is not the same in this way as with large swaths of time passing, but still it is very hard. And I do have to admit it was one of the first questions that was raised in my mind as I was going through the script the first time was how much time was passing there. And I was like, do we really need 5 years to go by while Maedhros is still on the cliffside? And because see, here's the thing, like the challenge here is that time is different for elves, right? So 5 years isn't necessarily going to feel like a really long time. I mean, from a human standpoint, 5 years is a really long time. I mean, again, it's been almost 5 years since we started this film project, and that feels like a really long time ago that we began. I couldn't even remember exactly when it was. And so, Nick, as you say, the immediacy of the threat from Angband, the immediacy, it's possible to fall into this stalemate between the two camps, right? Where like you can go on thinking for years, like, well, maybe, but maybe today is the day they're going to try something. I mean, that's possible to be stretched out, but imagining poor Maedhros, with moss growing on him on the cliffside, and It's challenging. It's challenging. You know, is there let me put this another way. What would be lost if we shortened that time span there? Just the initial time span between to make less time have passed. What would we lose?
So the strongest objection that was raised, to my mind, and I'm in the camp that we don't need it.
Okay.
But when objections were raised, one of the strongest ones that I felt was raised in opposition to shortening that time span was that the 5 years indicates just how, like, the Noldor completely let this opportunity get away from them.
Right.
You know, Morgoth is vulnerable. If they had gotten it together, they possibly could have, you know, put together an assault on Angband and taken him out, ostensibly.
Right.
But they hang out there for 5 years doing nothing.
Right.
You know, and that's what their treachery and suspicion of treachery has done.
Yep.
So this is one of the few episodes where we actually say a concrete amount of time.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
I wanted it to happen in this first episode to do some of the things you were talking about, establishing that for elves, 5 years doesn't seem like a very long time. So the elves will be hanging out in their camps, and I guess they're probably used to years of the trees, which are like 9 point something of our regular years of the sun. So to them, it would seem like maybe 6 months has passed, but reminding the viewer that it isn't 6 months like the elves are acting like it is 5 years. And Mythos hasn't been hanging there for 5 years. He's been hanging there much longer. So what it's doing is showing what Nick said about they are really wasting their time, that they could be attacking Morgoth, and Mythos is pretty miserable hanging up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the fact that the elves aren't in a hurry, right? And this is one of the places, you know, Nick, as you say, where a little like if Hurin and Huor had been there, they would have bloody attacked during those first few years, right? It would have happened if if there were humans in charge, or even humans contributing to these discussions, right? The idea that like 5 years could go by and then, and you know, and people would be like, gosh, I wonder if we're missing an opportunity here. But yeah, the idea of like quick and decisive action even is not really an elvish thing, even in general.
And understanding that some of the, you know, some people might be looking for that. Was one of the reasons why I've been strenuously opposed to any outright statement of how long this period of time is, because it really should be the amount of time that the viewer thinks it is. Whatever the amount of time the viewer thinks it is, that's how long it is. Right.
Because, of course, it doesn't have to be 5 years in order to be a waste of time, right? I mean, you know, goodness knows there can be military situations where waiting a day, you know, waiting a week, waiting a month could be a complete loss of, you know, what would have been a tactical opportunity. So that idea of like seizing the time when the you know, the fear of the sun was new upon them, I could imagine conveying that even if they only delayed 1 week, right? You know, that like within a week, Morgoth is reacting. Right. And
see, if we did that, then we wouldn't get the difference between how elves view time and how the human audience of the show views time. So the elves are acting like it's a week or it's just a couple months. The humans watching the show are going to react and say, wow, the elves really wasted a lot of time. They perceive time much differently than us. It seems to go a lot slower for them.
Right. And the only the risk, right, is, well, we take a risk in conveying that, because of course if the viewers, if the audience doesn't receive that in the right spirit, then it sounds merely comical, right? We don't want to make the elves look ridiculous, but it's a fine line, right? I mean, it is, because it is, we do want to convey that it's genuinely alien, right? I mean, it's different from us.
And I think we're definitely going to... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, Hakon's suggestion has been that with season 4, we should emphasize the timelessness of elves by not having explicit references to how much time has passed. And then in season 5, when men are on screen, that's when we can start drawing those differences and being like, wow, you mean hundreds of years passed in the last season? How did we not know that? And it's because the elves are like, what do you mean? It was no big deal. So he was thinking we'd have better opportunities next season to get into it, and he wanted to push to avoid explicit timekeeping by the elves. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't reference Years of the Sun yet, because presumably the elves are paying attention to the movements of the sun and will have noticed when a year has passed. So like when we want to start referencing things is debatable, but that shift throughout the season into next season was something Hakon wanted to emphasize.
And certainly doing the one reference here at the beginning, I mean, Rhiannon, I do think it's a very interesting idea to say, like, let's just say it once in order to help, like, calibrate the viewers, right, into...
Exactly. It's a little foretaste of what's going to come.
Exactly. And then we never talk about it again, so that, but we do convey the idea. If you were watching this first episode and had the impression that they'd only been here for a couple weeks, no, it's been 5 years. So just like take that fact and, you know, retain that in the back of your minds throughout the whole rest of the season as a kind of scale for the kind of thing that you're doing. That, I mean, that's an interesting mechanism, I think. I mean, yeah. Sorry, Nick.
I don't know if no, it's okay. I don't know if 5 years is really a long enough period of time for that to have the kind of impact that we're looking for in something like that. Also, I'm trying to avoid the kind of like nitpicky kind of like, well, when exactly did that happen, and did they have enough time to get from here to there, and you know, and you know, well, why haven't they developed their camps more, and why, you know, what are they eating, how are they, like, I'm trying to avoid those conversations by just leaving it vague enough for, you know, and if somebody has read The Tale of Years, they say, oh, it's 5 years, and that kind of makes sense. It looks like it, you know, they've been there for a while. And if a person has not read that, they're not sitting there scratching their head trying to figure out what the situation is, you know. Whereas a time, you know, whereas the longer time periods, like for instance during the building of Gondolin, I think afford that a little bit better for us than, you know, this relative comparatively short time period between the time, you know, where Mithros is hanging from his wrist on a cliff, you know.
No, but I think, again, as a kind of calibration, though, I do think that it can work, right? I mean, if, again, like, so if basically the viewer's experience, they're looking at this, and if we hadn't said anything, they would have thought that maybe it was weeks, right? That this first episode was happening during, and then we're like, oh yeah, P.S. it's been 5 years, right? Then when later on, I mean, we're going to see by episode 4, we're going to see whole strongholds being built and the kingdoms established and everything. So looking at this, people are likely to be like, oh, this looks like it's probably a couple years later, right? And they're like, well, no, remember that thing that looked like a few weeks was 5 years. This is actually about 100 years later, right? So that, you know, the scale is kind of projectable from that. Or again, it doesn't even have to be mathematically so, right? Just in order to give that one nudge to say what looks like what you may assume has been a short time on screen is actually not just twice as long, not just 5 times as long, but, you know, actually like a couple hundred times as long as it might have looked like, or as you might assume, because different scale here.
The other benefit of having the reference in this specific episode is that, like you said earlier, it emphasizes the hardiness of the elves. People realize that it's been more than 5 years that Mithras has been hanging up on this cliff. So he's something more than human if he is surviving that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that I think is, so I kind of had two thoughts, Rhiannon, about that, like in quick succession when I got to the scene where where it actually came up, right? My first thought was like, wow, like, actually saying it, like, yeah, I've been hanging here for years and I basically haven't eaten or drunk, but I'm okay. I mean, no, I'm not okay, but I'm alive still. I was like, my first thought was maybe we don't want to actually explicitly talk about that. But then my second thought was, but if we don't, everyone is going to assume it's just an oversight. Like, that it's going to be impossible for people to suspend disbelief, even if they were to think that it was weeks, right? I mean,
it's also interesting that Mithras basically invents the science of astronomy while hanging on a cliff to count.
Right.
What else does he have to do?
Right, exactly.
Did Morgoth give him some books to read while he was hanging or something?
Exactly. Yeah, he's probably composed, poetry, and he's devised the science of astronomy, and yeah. No, I'm sure he would. And he's got. I mean, the one thing he has is a nice view, right? It's like the only thing he has going for him. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, another thing that we ran into is that the early parts of the episode have to do a lot. Yes. And so we had to get a lot done scenes had to do more than one thing at a time. So yes. In order to squeeze in the forging of Ringel, for example, we needed to use that as the backdrop for the conversation between Fingin and Fingolfin that yes. leads to Fingin going off on his crazy rescue mission, because we needed to set that up, early enough in the episode so that so the viewer understands that that's what they're watching.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. No, and I agree, and that all seemed good. I mean, I certainly think feeling like I don't know. I definitely think that if you're feeling like every scene has multiple things that it has to accomplish, that is by far preferable to the opposite problem, right? Where you feel like you've got dead space that needs to be filled. So yeah, and I think that's often really possible. This might not seem like really high praise, but given the nature of season 4, the fact that I went through the first 4 episodes and I almost never at any point was I like, some exposition, delightful, let's hear more exposition, right? I mean, I thought that went really well. This is a season in which it is super hard to avoid stretches of exposition, because a lot of the things that happen, again, we get a lot of like, and meanwhile, what have we been doing? Let us talk about what we have been doing over the last, 20 years or something. That situation arises quite a bit, but it didn't really feel awkward.
Yeah. So that one of the things that was important about this season was to make sure that we were getting on the ground where decisions were being made.
Yes.
Because things happen in, of Balerion and its realms, right? Things happen during that period of time.
Yeah. So
we needed to get at why they happened and what led to those decisions. This has been the same thing that we've been dealing with the entire series, essentially.
Right.
We kind of know what the climax of the episode is, right? But we need to figure out what led to that so that we get there.
Yeah. 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 No, that makes sense. I thought that was really good. Let's see. What's the other thing there'd been another thing I was just going to transition to. Oh yeah. So the one thing, there was one moment, and again, keep in mind, I mean all of this in a very complimentary way. And also keep in mind that I have in mind Tolkien's vocabulary and on fairy stories, the distinction that he makes between suspending disbelief and engaging secondary engaging secondary belief, right? In general, I found myself very thoroughly drawn into secondary belief all the way through, and so therefore, Tolkien's description of that has become my kind of go-to vocabulary for those moments, because I know as soon as I read that in On Fairy Stories for the first time, I was like, no, that's exactly right. When you feel that a story demands, like, where in order to, that point when you're reading a story and you're like, well, in order to continue enjoying this story, I have to exert some work here, right? I have to actually, like, I'm experiencing disbelief or resistance to the story, and I must exert that in order to carry on. The only moment where I got a twitch of that was in the rapidity of the assumptions of of Fingolfin's camp about Fingon's disappearance. How universally convinced they all were that he was certainly being held by the Feanorians. I mean, that some would say that, and that some would think that, especially those who were sort of angrier and a little closer to the characters who would go around with their hands on their sword hilts more often anyway, right? But was there, am I misremembering? Was there a contrary voice? Was there anyone in Fingolfin's camp who was like, there might be a perfectly, some kind of other explanation for this? It felt a little too uniform. It felt like I was wanting at least somebody to be trying to talk sense into them and saying, hey, we're all being rash here. Did you guys talk about that?
Well, I tried to make Finrod that voice, but then have him sort of get shouted down or talked over when he was trying to bring that up. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in the
Finrod's
first
a great
scene
choice
of them
for
having,
that. Yeah.
in the first scene of them having the council, like I think Killigorm is throwing out some possible other things that might have happened to Fingon.
Maybe he went hunting, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And like Finrod's sort of trying to agree with that, but then Turgon and Fingolfin are saying we looked for him everywhere. There was no sign that he went hunting. He organizes the hunting patrols himself, so he knows that he should have told someone where he was going.
Yeah.
So when we talked about it originally, we talked about it as the belief that Fingon is in the camp in Maglor's camp, mm-hmm. Is something that is not necessarily it doesn't go straight to they've got him, like they've kidnapped him.
Right.
I mean, I can see where that might get interpreted differently, the way that it's written in the outline. But when they basically, the denial of the Feanorians that he's with them is what kind of solidifies the suspicion.
Right. Yeah, let's see. I'm trying. So here's the thing that I really liked about it. What I really liked about it is that the suspicions of the Feanorians created like an unfolding crisis that Fingon and Maedhros could arrive back in the midst of without just having to manufacture one totally artificially, right? Like, coincidentally, at the same time, hostilities were randomly starting to break out at exactly this point, just in time for Fingon to come back. That there's an actual logical cause and effect relationship between Fingon's departure and his return, and that I thought was all really smart.
Yeah, because there's something, because when we talked about you had wanted Thorondor to show up in front of, figuratively, all of the Noldor.
Yeah.
Right. And so we knew that meant that they had to be meeting in some way.
Yeah.
And in order for that to be along for the ride, dramatically speaking, that the tension there needed to be escalating.
Yes.
And
yes.
So it's already super, like, even as it's written, it's kind of convenient that Thorndor happens to show up the instant before they come to blows. Now, presumably, being an eagle, he could see that things were disintegrating down there, and so he hurried up, and got there faster.
Right.
That's how I would explain it to to questioning
the timing,
fans.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
At the Comic-Con panel, that's how I'd be explaining it to the person.
And I even had Fingin, when he's on Thorondor, he notices that Fingolfin has drawn his sword because Ringel is a special shiny sword that shines differently, and so it's recognizable from the air. So he notices that and is like, hurry up, Thorondor, we have to go stop them.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that.
We can probably work more subtlety into the dialogue before they confront the Feanorians, where there's more uncertainty. Part of the point of the scripts is also just to get the whole story out and to make everyone's motivations clear. So I kind of have been encouraging Rhiannon to be very explicit with what people are thinking and why. So you can add subtlety to that in revision, I think, and make a little bit more nuance. So I agree that we don't want it to seem like they jump too quickly to the wrong conclusion or too uniformly to the wrong conclusion.
Exactly.
But once the Feanorians act suspicious, everyone kind of comes to the point of view that they must be hiding something.
Right. And I totally agree, Marie. I think that's a very, very sensible way to approach it. Because, obviously, in a revision process, right, it's much easier to, I mean, this is exactly what Tolkien did, right? Tolkien, as we saw in the history of the Lord of the Rings, when in Mythgard Academy, when Tolkien revises, he always is reducing. Right, he reduces the dialogue. Things just come out in dialogue, often his character dialogue, right? Like the entire plan and like the projection of what's going to happen next and everything that's going on. And then he'll go back and he'll actually cut the real references to it and make it much more subtle and implied in the actual final version. But much better to just kind of get that stuff all out there first, so that it's clear, rather than trying to go first for subtlety and ending up with cryptic.
Right.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I've ran into, is I've had to cut dialogue where I'm just like completely explaining a character's motivations, and I'm like, they could be conveying that through their acting, not through what they're actually saying.
Right.
It's tough as a script writer to remember that there's a physical human that's going to be standing there with a face that does things.
Exactly.
And you don't have to do all the work yourself.
Right. Yeah. The actor and the directors do play a role, in those things. Absolutely. I mean, I haven't written nearly as much script as Rhiannon has, and I have to commend her because, like, in all of this time, I came up with about 25 minutes of a pilot, which not nearly as much material. So. Yeah, no, it's absolutely splendid. Now, again, as Aslan's Compass on Twitch is saying, Noldor making rash judgments and assuming the worst. Where have we seen that before? So, it's not like it's out of character or completely crazy for the Noldor to be doing something like that. And we do want to emphasize that this is still, despite the fact that 5 years have passed, which seems a long time for humans, this is still a powder keg situation, that we have, real enmity, deep grudges, which are still very near to the surface and everything, lots of suspicion. So, it's not at all like an inappropriate direction for things to go.
Right. And Fingolfin's people are not wholly innocent in the situation either.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, one last thing I want to touch. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that another thing that sort of causes an increase in tension and people more quickly jumping to assumptions in Fingolfin's camp is the fact that the person they send as the messenger to the Feanorian camp is Rogren, who is Fingon's captain. So, like, they're probably very close. Yeah. So Rogren is the one who is in the Feanorian camp, and he's like, did you kill Fingon? Did you kill him? Is his body there in your camp? So he's the quickest to jump to that because he's really worried about his lord. So then he probably went back there and spun the tale of what the Fëanorian said to make it much more suspicious sounding to Turgon and Fingolfin before they went over to the meeting that Maglo organized.
Right. And Rogrim also not necessarily the great strategist of the Noldor army, right? I'm thinking also. I mean, in a very attractive and delightful way, bit of a thug, right? I mean, at least that's always been my view of his character. Maybe it's just because of... I mean, I'm thinking of him with his enormous
It's the
hammer.
name.
It's the name too, right? Rog. I mean, come on. Like, was there ever a
Hammer
genius named
rat.
Rog? Yes, exactly.
He dies fighting outside the walls. This is not the actions of a strategist.
No, no.
If this guy had a D&D class, he would definitely be a barbarian.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, exactly. Now that you've brought it up, I can say what I want to say more accurately. Intelligence is Rog's dump stat, right? We can all kind of agree on that, I think.
I mean, he took a feat for heavy armor, but
absolutely, weapon specialization in the Great Hammer. I get it, but anyway, yeah. So again, that also makes sense. We see his love for Fingon and his loyalty to Fingon, and his suspicion of the Fëanorians, and again, not the brightest bulb in the Noldoran camp. So yeah, that all I think works very well. And yeah, so you're right about that. I was forgetting Rogrim's role. And by the way, just as a side note, one of the things that was super fun about the scripts in general, I was really impressed at how well, during the discussions, when we're like mostly just discussing the major plot points and the sort of the big issues and things like that, there were characters which, we'd kind of wave our hands at and be like, oh yeah, we got to remember that these people exist, right? Because they've not come in, like Ignor, right? That was one of the things that really struck me. Ignor is a much bigger character in the first 4 episodes than I expected him to be, which is great.
What?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I'm saying compared to our discussions, in our discussions, we barely acknowledge Ignor's existence, but he's there. Like, he's got a role. He's present. We see him on stage almost every time, and almost every episode he comes up. So like, I'm not saying that like he has a lot of development, but he doesn't need development yet. He's not in a character development moment yet, right? That's going to come next season. But as far as like familiarity, that he's there, that Rogrim was there and got lines, already at this point, that was cool. I liked that. That we met, and here I'm jumping ahead, but that we met Anael, that we, So yeah, no, there were several times when I was like, hey, this is really cool, because those kinds of things are never things that really kind of entered much our discussion, or if they did, only in very general terms. Like when we'd say things like, oh yeah, we gotta remember that, like, this person, we're gonna need this person to do something here in episode 7, so this person can't be a jack in the box in season 7 popping out of nowhere. We need to somehow kind of begin to set that up. So I liked it. That was much more than I had imagined. I know, Nick, I'm gathering from your tone that you were feeling a lack of development or a lack of time for that.
No, it was more that when you guys were talking about the unfortunate death of a certain individual, and about how it would give Ignor more of a chance, because we never, he's never been in it, like he hasn't done anything this whole time, and I was thinking to myself, but he's done things. There's things he's done. No, that's all. That's all.
Yeah,
I was.
I got it. I got you. Yep. Well, it still will allow him wonderful scope. But anyway, yeah. That's a discussion for another time, however. let's not get on that subject, or else we won't get to talk about episodes 2 through 4.
Shall we talk about episode 2, or was there something else?
One quick thing, the language thing in episode 1, because the language issue, episode 1 was the main language issue, right? After episode 1, it smoothed out really easily, right? Were you guys happy with how the language thing came out?
I was pretty happy with it. I'd love to see what other people think about it.
I really want to see what it looks like on screen. Like, I think that's where it's really gonna come out all right.
Yeah.
But
just quickly, Rihanna, could you direct me to like a page number in the season 1 script that I might go to show on screen some examples of the, you know, the Quenya Sindarin telepathy moments? Sorry, and then I wasn't trying to cut you off, but just
my script.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so the telepathy moment, that would be, I'm pretty sure it's in Act 3.
I can give you my thought while she's doing that. I was distracted by it at first, and then I started to really pay attention, and I figured out that when they were speaking Quenya, they were speaking archaic English, and not speaking Quenya, they weren't speaking archaic English, and also the fact that you know, the familiar, which is the thou thy piece, is amongst friends and family, but the only thing was I saw a lack of consistency. Like, for example, Celeborn and Círdan, when they're speaking to between themselves with nobody else around, they're speaking archaic English. They shouldn't be speaking Sindarin, so they shouldn't be using archaic English. Stuff like that, things that an editor could go through and just fix. But overall, I think it's an awesome idea because, hey, this is Tolkien. I mean, gosh, of course, right? We would do this. I mean, I could hear a fan going, why are you doing that? It's like, my response would be, it's a Tolkien story. Why would we not be doing that? So I thought that was kind of cool. And I do like using it as a distinction that these elves are speaking a different language, even though to us, both groups are speaking English. I thought that was pretty cool. But the consistency, you know, so like, for example, when Fingon's speaking to the messenger from the Feanorians, he should be speaking the you version. And I can't remember if he is or not. But anyway, just to make sure we have the usage down right. But again, I think that's something you just figure out in editing. So it's not a big deal.
All right, the bottom of page 17 is where the telepathy starts. And while you're going there, I kind of like to talk about my use of archaic English.
Okay.
So my goal in this was to use archaic English throughout all the main story. They're using a little bit more modern English in the frame when it's Bilbo and Gandalf and Balin talking. Yes. But I wanted all the elves to be speaking archaically. And so what I did to this, because I have no experience at all writing in archaic English, so I looked up the rules for it and cases when you would use the familiar thou versus the formal you. Mm-hmm. And what I read was that thou would be used when it's people speaking who are familiar with each other, so among family or among close friends, but also when it's someone in a higher social class speaking to someone in a lower social class. So, for example, Fingon would talk to the messenger of the Feanorian camp using thou because he is a lord and he is above that messenger. That messenger is just a lowly soldier of somebody. Also, I read that it can be used insultingly. So especially when he's mad at somebody, he would be using thou, not you.
Yeah, because for exactly the reason as you say, thou is by default the familiar one, right? Which means if you're speaking to somebody who's not a close friend of yours and you're using thou, you are either implying intimacy or you are saying you are lower than, I'm not speaking with respect to you. This, by the way, of course, people will remember, although Tolkien doesn't depict it in the dialogue, this is what, remember how everyone in Minas Tirith thinks that Pippin is like he must be a prince? And Tolkien explains that one of the reasons they think that is that in the Shire, they just use the familiar form for everybody. Like the formal you is really not used in terms of formality at all. So when Pippin addresses Denethor, he calls him thou, as if he were his cousin or something like that, because that's what you do in the Shire. But in Gondor, when they hear him referring to Denethor as thou, they're like, well, clearly he is Denethor's peer, or else no one would ever speak to Denethor like that, to the Lord of the City, unless he were his peer like that. So everyone's like, obviously, Pippin is a prince, right? Which, of course, ironically, he kind of is. But But anyway, that kind of dimension of thou is definitely involved. Is definitely involved there. That one of the coolest things, and this is Sparrow Alden's observation. The coolest example of the thee and thou thing, if you want to find a really good Tolkien example, read the Athrobeth in Morgoth's Ring, the Athrobeth of Finrod and Andreth, which of course we're going to be talking about a lot next season anyway when we get to Andreth. But in the Athrobeth, Sparrow was the one who made this comment in one of her early Signum papers years ago, and I've just been entranced by it ever since, because Christopher Tolkien points out, like, my father was inconsistent in his use of thee and thou in this, and Christopher just sees it as a blemish, like he just thinks that Tolkien didn't maintain it properly, whereas Sparrow argues that it's because it's particularly Finrod, who sometimes calls her you and sometimes calls her thou. And so it just looks inconsistent. And Sparrow's argument is that there's actually very deliberate rhetorical reasons why he's doing that. There are times when he is speaking to her intimately as a friend, and there are other times when he speaks to her with respect as an equal. And that kind of ebbs and flows in emotionally appropriate ways as the conversation goes on. She did this really cool kind of thought experiment where she had two people reading the passages, and like when Finrod says thou, lean towards each other, and when he says you lean away, and it works. Like, it's really, really cool just to kind of show the different modes in which he's speaking. Anyway, so you're right. I mean, that is an appropriate way to do it. And, a lot of those subtleties are going to be kind of lost on people, but I do think it's appropriate to have them be speaking more archaically. It's difficult.
I do suggest, though, that you consider having the Sindarin speak regularly. I mean, so that before we even get to the point where they don't understand each other, the audience understands that there's two languages going on here. Or two cultures or something, that they're different, rather than have them both speak the same, because they don't speak the same language.
Of course, the risk here is that if we have binary, basically, right, like archaic, non-archaic, and I agree, Rhiannon, as you said, even it is clear, and I could very much hear the difference between, Bilbo's conversations and, the elves, the Noldorin conversations. So I could tell that there was a shift in register there, but it's not really a question of like modern English, right? They're not going to be thinking and using modern words, right? Necessarily. But again, if we have the sort of a binary, right? They speak in the more archaic diction, or they don't speak in archaic diction. We might want to save that. Like, we might want to save that for human versus elvish language or conversation, rather than using it as a distinction between Quenya and Sindarin.
Yeah, I agree that elves' cultures are similar enough that we don't want to do a huge cultural divide between the language of the Noldor and the Sindar. But the idea is that there are places in this episode where the audience will hear Sindarin spoken as Sindarin and hear Quenya spoken as Quenya, and hopefully that will help convey that.
Yeah. Yes.
And I tried to reference like which one they were speaking. I know in the script I indicated using underlining, like Sindarin has dashed underlines and Quenya has double underlines. Mm-hmm. But even when they're talking about which language is being spoken, I tried to have them say, not as directly as this, but we're speaking Quenya now. Right. Or something, just so the audience, even if they aren't paying enough attention to notice the differences between the two versions of Elvish being spoken. And I think like people who really pay attention will be able to tell that even though they're both Elvish, they're different languages because Quenya and Sindarin sound different when you listen to them. But I wanted to make it clear that they are different languages. And so one of the things that I did was based on which group of elves the scene was sort of being shown from the point of view of,
Mm-hmm.
they would be the ones speaking English, and the people they were interacting with would be the ones speaking the other language, whether it was Quenya or Sindrin. There was a place when Círdan and Celeborn first come out of the woods and run into Glorfindel and Rogren at the gates.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it might be good to just not even have subtitles there and just let the audience experience the feeling that they have of not having any idea what these people they have come up to are saying.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Plus, it gives people on online discussion boards something to do as they try to, translate the.
Yeah, you can just see the person Googling, what does Glorfindel say to.
Right.
Because I do that all the time.
Exactly.
When there's like unsubtitled Klingon in a Star Trek episode or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's good. I like it. I thought that the way that the telepathy was brought in was really interesting. I don't think we talked. Did we talk about that? Like, did we talk about that on the podcast and I forgot about it, or did we not talk about really telepathy as a kind of tertium quid here between the?
So, it had been discussed pretty early on. I think, like, it's definitely come up, but I don't think it was ever really. It's never really been discussed in detail what telepathy is and what it does and how it works and what the rules are, which was, when we were talking during script discussions, could we use telepathy here? It's like, well, we haven't really defined how that works yet. So maybe we wait a little bit before we do that. And we wound up putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And at this point, we're like, we can't put it off any longer because this is kind of like the main thing that's going to come into play here.
Yeah. No, I thought it was done very well. I love the whole so the fact that you have some being like skilled at it, being able to perceive others' thoughts, as Turgon says here on the screen, is that makes a lot of sense. I think that seems to me right. I don't think that telepathy is just like a natural thing that all elves necessarily can do and all elves equally well. And to show some, Finrod, Turgon, Galadriel, who are better at that than other people, is good. And of course, like, we can't shy away from Galadriel and telepathy, right? I mean, she's one of the ones whom Tolkien actively depicts doing that, and Finrod as well with his discovery of the men. So that I thought worked really well. Even the fact that kind of comes around to sort of showing that this skill is more prevalent in the House of Finarfin than it is in others, I thought was kind of cool. Even though that's never discussed, but that was sort of something. Again, Turgon is not of the House of Finarfin. I know it's not restricted to it, but that it correlated with it, I thought was kind of cool. Okay. Anyway, in general, I thought it was. I know it was an issue that we talked about, but I thought it worked really smoothly. Let's talk about episode 2. What were your
great idea?
Some of your primary reactions and thoughts about episode 2. So first, just let's do a brief recap. So we ended with the return of Maedhros and the recognition that he's alive, right? So the beginning of episode 2 comes from we're still among the Noldor and still the divided camps, right? Maedhros is now with the Feanorians, but the camps are still there and they're still divided. And the culmination of the episode is the abdication of Maedhros, right?
Yes.
Remember that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun planning this episode, partially because it's based on such a short amount of text.
Right.
Like, obviously we have the dialogue where Maedhros ceds the crown to Fingolfin, but how to get to that point was pretty much just whatever you guys wanted, whatever we wanted.
Right,
and
right.
So it was kind of fun to play with different ideas of what would lead the characters to that point.
which is what led us to the rather controversial decision to make Curufin kind of the lead character of the episode, which seems a little weird because he's not involved in the big event, right? But it just seems so naturally that he would be kind of working behind the scenes,
yes,
to bring a big chunk of Fingolfin's forces over to their side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that was interesting. And the thing that I was most interested in that little subplot was how swiftly, like how directly, Fingolfin calls him out for it. You know, like Fingolfin sees through it and sees the motivations behind it, right? One of the logical extensions of the whole telepathy thing is that, so doing a kind of a plot based on like innuendo and like saying one thing but meaning another and putting a fair cloak before your intentions and all of those kinds of things which, you know, make for interesting stories. It's a lot harder when people can read your thoughts, right? I mean, when the characters are a little bit not necessarily immune to that, but have defenses against that kind of thing, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So I was kind of thinking, you know, so the moment when it is Fingolfin, isn't it, who kind of calls it out there
Yes, there's a bit of a parallel to Fingolfin trying to call Morgoth out.
Yeah.
At the end of the next season that we're definitely anticipating in this scene.
Yes.
Right.
So yeah, he's in full-on righteous anger mode.
Yeah, exactly. And so my first response was I had this one very brief flash where I was like, wow, that was very sudden. But then I was like, actually, yeah, you know, I mean, maybe in a purely human drama, you know, there could be whole like, oh no, what do you mean? Like, that was not our intentions at all. And I was like, actually, yeah, no, that's not how it would go, right? Among the elf lords, they would be like, I see to the heart of your intentions and forget about it, man. Right. I like that.
And we had some discussion when we were talking this over about how like Curufin is targeting Finrod, which seems like a bad idea because Finrod surely could see through all this. But also Finrod really wants to believe him.
Yes.
Right? Finrod really wants to believe that Curufin's just looking out for him. And he really wants to believe that they can somehow fix this whole thing without bloodshed, which they wind up doing, but not through any of these machinations.
Right.
And Curufin deliberately is using true things. He's telling him real things that happened to sway him.
Right.
You know, he doesn't lie to him. And that's really part of the insidiousness of Curufin's character is he doesn't really lie to you. Like he never really lies to you, or
he doesn't even talk to you at all because he basically has Caligorm as his mouthpiece throughout this whole thing.
Right.
And Caligorm is not duplicitous.
Right.
So Caligorm is saying things that he truly believes himself, which is why it's hard to see through it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's all very well done, but I agree with you, Nick. Finrod is a really great choice because also, I mean, Finrod is, as you say, it's about his desires, right? He's like one of the great reconcilers, right? He's one of the people who wants most to work with everybody and for everybody to get along. And so, yes, although he is going to be very perceptive and is more sensitive and more able to read people's thoughts than anybody else, it's one thing to be able to have that ability, and it's another reason, and it's another thing actually to apply that ability, and against your own inclinations, again, and read somewhere, and read in someone else's thoughts something which is not what you're hoping to see there,
and something that's kind of alien to you.
Right. Exactly. Something that he might not really. Yes, look for, even fully understand if he does read it necessarily. Yeah, no, exactly. I liked that. I thought that stuff all worked for me. That stuff all worked pretty well. Especially, and I like the way that Maedhros, like, we don't get, nobody knows, right? Maedhros' abdication is a surprise to everybody, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked the not only the drama of that, but the way that we get the reactions from all sides, right? As Maedhros does this, the way in which Maedhros is, like, now that Maedhros is back, Fingon has returned Maedhros, so everything has changed. But everything has not changed in the sense of, like, well, now everybody's friends, right? Universal harmony has broken out in the camps because Fingon returned with Maedhros. Instead, it's going to be like, okay, now we're playing for different stakes, right? Now we got to figure things out different. And so you can see that with Curufin. Right now he's like, okay, different game. So let's take a different approach.
And while he could have potentially manipulated Maglor, he can't really manipulate Maedhros, and that really got shown towards the tail end of season 3. Also, is that he really can't manipulate Maedhros. Maedhros is kind of onto him,
right?
And so he's got to work through other people, and now he's working through Celegorm to work through Finrod because that's an easier target than Maedhros.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. No, I thought that was that came across really well. And so the way that you get, one way to kind of paraphrase the main action of episode 2 is sort of like, okay, so now Fingon has returned with Maedhros, so now the whole situation has changed. But exactly how has it changed? And it's not until the end when we get Maedhros' abdication that we really see the permanent. It's kind of cool to see the dramatic climax of episode 1, which suggests, lays the groundwork for this coming together. It's still, there's still suspense about it at the end of episode 2, right? When we see sort of the fruit of that in Maedhros' abdication, and I loved the way that came about. It felt very natural.
Now, meanwhile, in the south, Galadriel, of all people, is having an encounter with Fairy.
Yes, exactly. That was neat. I really liked the arrival there, and her. So she's coming. So we had her traveling with Celeborn. No, wait, who was she traveling with? She was.
In the script, she travels with Celeborn, yes.
Okay. In the script, she travels with Celeborn. That's what I thought. That was another thing that I was noticing, when we talked in the episodes about the whole development of the relationship between Celeborn and Galadriel. We sort of focused on the big turning points, right? The major moments. And I noticed that in the scripts, they got much more consistent interaction time than... we then had necessarily not going through and imagining it out scene by scene in the discussions than I had thought. How were you guys feeling about that? Are you comfortable, happy with how the Celeborn and Galadriel relationship is being set up from the beginning? Are there things that you were uncertain about? What were your thoughts about that as you were beginning to work that in?
Well, I definitely wanted to make sure that things don't come quite as much out of left field.
Sure.
Especially when at the Merith Atherthad, when she starts bearing her soul to him. It's not that weird because they've kind of been building at least a cursory relationship up until that point. Another thing that I liked about her arrival there, like they have that little feast kind of to celebrate her arrival.
Yeah.
And Norn immediately reads her. Like Norn has her number right away. Like the singer have no idea, but Norn immediately gets it.
Right.
Without even talking to her. He's just like watching her and he immediately has her number and starts telling Mablung this unsolicited story about the petty dwarves for no reason whatsoever.
Yes. The peril that was one of the most that was the most surprising moment in episode 2 for me. The parallel between Galadriel and the petty dwarves. That was really interesting. But also, I mean, talk about accomplishing multiple things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that was making me think about that whole moment, the Norn moment, and his reading of Galadriel was, it was making me realize Galadriel has by far the slowest developing character development of any character in all of film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody's character develops more slowly than Galadriel's character develops. Because she's still going to be, the things that Norn sees, she's still going to be struggling with that in The Lord of the Rings. At the end of the Third Age, it's still going to be an issue, right? So we're playing a really long game with Galadriel, and with this season is the real crisis of it, because we're showing her in crisis, right? And so somehow she has to emerge from this crisis having changed, but not having had some kind of complete conversion experience.
Yeah, and it's also true that we're probably going to have her kind of backslide at least once or twice over the thousands of years. There's gonna be things that, like, she's gonna wind up doing things that has the audience going, are we sure this is one of the good guys? Because that was kind of, and I think that we've kind of walked that line a little bit with Melian this season, and I think that we've kind of been getting some reactions to that maybe the way that we've been depicting her is a little darker than people are kind of expecting.
I think what we've been going for with Melian is perilous.
Right. That's the exact word. Like, I want people to be thinking about why the Men of Rohan and why Boromir are so nervous about Galadriel.
Right.
There's something dangerous about this person.
Yeah, and Nick, as you were saying with like the encounter with Fairy, right? I mean, there needs to be that needs to be sort of proportional, right? That she feels as mysterious and dangerous in a sense, perilous, right, to the elves as the elves do to the humans. That seems to me appropriate. She shouldn't be like one of the girls, Melian. And by the way, P.S. I really like how the relationship between Luthien and Galadriel, like Luthien is one of the girls, right? So like they she was able to, like, the two of them are able to bond on a level that Galadriel doesn't bond with Melian on. You don't like get to be friends, you don't get to be pals with, like, Melian doesn't have BFFs, right?
Right.
She condescended to have a husband, but she does not have a BFF among the elves. Like, she's a different order of being. Anyway, so all that stuff was really interesting, and I agree with you about relapses. I think that showing her to be on, we can show her by the end of the season to be on a different trajectory than she was at the beginning of the season. But that doesn't mean that the issue's over for the rest of her life. And there will be other moments and temptations when we will see her changing in different directions.
Yeah. Galadriel is going to be a good guy, but she's going to be ambitious. And that ambition is not going to go away. So that's what Norn sees in her, is the ambition.
Yeah. Sorry, Rhiannon, you were going to say?
Yeah, so the change that I was trying to show with her encounter with Melian that happens at the end of episode 2 was she goes from wanting to rule a realm of her own right then to wanting to learn how to become a better queen.
Right.
So that's some of the stuff she does in episode 3 is Melian comes to her and like offers to teach her how to make this new recipe of limbus. So Galadriel is like, yes, I want to learn how to do that because that's how you become an elf queen.
Right, exactly.
It's got to be on your resume.
Yeah, absolutely. Like to make she wants to be able to make the next level Lembas, so that absolutely, because then she's not just going to be one of the elf queens, right? She's going to be. Yeah, no, it all makes sense, and you can see the pragmatic element of her interest there, again, without her just seeming like a villain or seeming too. But by the way, I did not think Melian was too dark. I got mysterious. I got, again, I certainly got the sense that, you're not just gonna, she's not like your hostess at tea. Like, that is not what living in Doriath is like, even if you're Galadriel. But I didn't think she was, I wasn't questioning her goodness.
Well, we went a little darker quite recently, so okay. You'll see what we're going to talk about.
Okay, well, so we'll get a chance for further darkness. And by the way, a side note here, thinking about Melian and her words to Galadriel and those conversations from the text, I just love how that, so Rhiannon, one of my very favorite things about having scripts is placing the lines of the Silmarillion and the kinds of contexts that we do. I mean, whenever I'm going through the script and the passages of the text emerge, right? It's this awesome experience, this sort of like, all of a sudden, whoop, like there I am, like in the, these words which are so intimately familiar. And then, but like the before and the after, and sometimes things interjected in between. It is such a kind of a magical effect as you're reading through. I just love that.
Yeah. Context. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really emphasizes, I am just forced to remember every time that pops up of how isolated of context, how bare in a lot of ways the plot summary of the Silmarillion is. I mean, that's the mode it's meant to be. I mean, it's because
a character doesn't just walk up to another character and say the line that's in the Silmarillion. That's not how that went down. There was a conversation surrounding that.
Right. The entire genre that the Silmarillion is in, like that whole style of writing, is it's the word that Christopher Tolkien uses to describe it, which is of course perfectly accurate, is epitomizing, which means the narrative that's there, like when Angrod delivers his line, or when Caranthir does his nay further, speech, and when Galadriel and Melian have their conversation. Even those moments which are down close to the action are still epitomes, right? Like that exchange between Melian and Galadriel is not meant to be like, and that's the only conversation they ever had about this. It's an epitome. It's an encapsulation of the interactions between Melian and Galadriel that happened over years, So but again, we're, the way that we've managed, I say as if I did the work, the way that you guys have managed to preserve those things and have them come in and have them fit in neatly into the tapestry, I think is really cool. I just love those things. Anyway, so sorry, I'm kind of digressing now from where we were talking about with Galadriel. Episode 2... Celeborn is still he goes back to the north, right? So he's still back in the north, and he's not, but because it's in episode 3, he returns with the message of Thingol, right?
Yes. Right. Yeah. At the end of this episode is when he departs.
Is when he leaves, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, and one side note of, or one side effect, that is, I should say, of how drawn in I was by these scripts is that I read them all one after the other, so I sometimes I get fuzzy as to which happened in which episode because I read them all four at once. Okay, so that happens he leaves at the end of. So what else in the Doriath action? I'm forgetting. Does Galadriel has her crisis by the end of this episode?
It's not really resolved.
No, but she collapses. Like she does her.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So she has her encounter with Fairy, and it leaves her kind of. And also another thing that I thought we needed to be very, very careful was to make sure that it didn't look like Melian was seeing everything that Galadriel was seeing.
Yes.
In the vision, because we can't, because otherwise the kinslaying's given away.
Yes.
Or people are wondering why doesn't Melian know about the kinslaying? Or we can leave it kind of vague, like maybe she knows, maybe she doesn't know. but we can't tell the audience, is using the language of film, we can't tell the audience Melian totally knows.
Right. Yeah, and that would be harder. I mean, hey, right? She's a Maya. She could have ineffable reasons for not revealing that to her husband, but that's hard. I mean, that would require suspension of disbelief, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do need to have. So are there?
It would just be another in a long list of people that are keeping secrets from Thingol in this season, but
Right. But yeah, I think we probably don't want to have her actually actively concealing things, at least not yet, from Thingol. That time could come, perhaps, but not yet. Okay, so how? I'm forgetting now. How did we convey? Listen to me again. How did you guys convey the that Melian doesn't see the things that we see, that Galadriel sees?
So what happens is, in the scene, Galadriel goes into this little secret garden that Melian has within Doriath, and Melian has like a waterfall there and this cup, and she fills it with water from the waterfall.
Right.
And so as she and Galadriel talk back and forth, Galadriel picks up the water from the cup, and like she asks Melian what it is, and Melian doesn't give her a straight answer, but she's like, this could hurt you if you don't have peace between your mind and your heart, or something like that. And so Galadriel, being Galadriel, is like, well, I have to try this. And so she drinks it and immediately starts having a vision that's like very personal to her. It's representing what she desires. So I had her like immediately come face to face with Feanor, and Feanor takes off his crown and puts it on Galadriel, because that's what Galadriel wants at this point in her character arc. And then she continues on, and like at the end of the vision, she collapses, and Melian is still outside the vision.
Right.
And like she catches Galadriel, but she didn't see inside Galadriel's mind.
Okay.
Right. Like there's no kind of like cutting in between. Like you're not seeing like Melian's eyes right before you go into the vision. Like when we see Galadriel do that, for example, in the Lord of the Rings films.
Right.
When Galadriel does the one who has seen the eye, and then you see her eyes, and then you see the eye. Right. The implication is that she is also seeing, that she either put that image in Frodo's head or is seeing it at the same time.
Right.
So because we didn't have a moment after, because Galadriel's passed out, Melian can't ask her, what did you see?
Right.
Which is what happens during the mirror scene in the Lord of the Rings. But there is definitely film language that can be used to telegraph to the audience that that this is a collective vision, but we want to make sure we shied away from that kind of thing.
Right, that makes sense. And I loved the water thing. I loved the anticipation of the mirror of Galadriel. It's like those moments when everyone, because I mean, with Galadriel we have to be especially sensitive to this, right? I mean, she's one of the only characters in the entire First Age part of the story here that everybody recognizes, right? That everybody is, thinks they already know, basically, right? And is going to be making connections forward. So yeah, like having those even just as like a piece of fan service, it's brilliant. But it's more than that, right? The way in which we can see her learning from Melian, but not just imitating her. I loved the difference, right? It would have been too on the nose for her to look into the water and see a vision there, right? For her instead to have to take this vision into her, right, by drinking the water and having this happening to her, was sufficiently different, and again, not just a difference which seemed merely like a random difference in order to distinguish the two, right? It was clearly a different experience for her. It affected her. It was more invasive, right? Because she really took it in rather than only perceiving it.
But again, it was something that she chose. So we wanted to make sure that Melian didn't like offer it to her or hold it out to her.
Right.
Because we didn't want to put Melian in a position where she was actively endangering where it appeared that she was actively endangering Galadriel. But we did want to mirror the scene.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, that was great. I loved that. I really, really enjoyed that that parallel. And again, both the similarities and the differences I thought worked really, really well. And the fact that because we didn't just in the podcast we didn't discuss the mechanism there at all, right? We talked about her having having this crisis. With we had Melian being involved, but I don't think we talked at all about the mechanism, did we? That was just you guys.
I think you had implied that it would be she looks into her eyes, like when Galadriel greets the Fellowship, and the parallel was going to be there.
Right, that's my big memory.
And that's what made me nervous, was the fact that she'd be looking into her eyes, which I felt was immediately going to tell the audience that Melian is seeing everything.
Is seeing things. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That would make we don't want it to look like she is reading there what happened. Yep. No, that's good. No, and this is better anyway, so that's good.
Well, we wanted to emphasize the feeling of fairy, and so by having surroundings that spoke to it, we figured that would help as well.
And as everybody knows, you don't eat or drink anything that somebody is fairy offers you, because bad things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now Galadriel can never leave Doriath, so there you go. Yeah. Cool.
And the other thing this does, having it set where it is in the episode, is it's a moment of tension, and like you wouldn't want to go from the scene where Fingolfin goes up to the gates of the Fëanor camp and is demanding that they come out and answer for their crimes, to Galadriel calmly sitting at a feast, looking in Melian's eyes.
Right.
So it has to be something more interesting than that happening in the scene in between the major plot of the episode.
Right. It has to be perilous.
Yeah. No, that was good. I agree. One last issue, and it's not so much an issue in episode 2 specifically. It comes up first for me in episode 2, but it carries on through 3 and 4, and that is the length of Maedhros's recovery, the length of time it takes Maedhros to recover. Now, obviously, I understand why we don't want it to look like he's just gets a good night's sleep and is fine in the morning. Like, we want to show that lasting damage has been done. And obviously, when we're getting up towards episode 4 and the training montages and stuff, that's different, right? Acquiring new skills with his left hand is different from the recovery of his health, right? But he seems to be really weak for a super, super long time. And I was wondering what I kept expecting him to recover, again, just his health, not necessarily his skills, but his health faster than he was. It seems to take him like decades to get better. And I was wondering why that was.
Well, he was hanging on the cliff for 5 years.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, sure.
The main issue is that in episode 3, the conflict is around what they're going to do about the Morgoth situation now that the Noldor are reconciled with each other.
Right.
And obviously Maedhros's idea is, let's fight Morgoth.
Attack.
Please.
Yes, right. Attack. Yeah.
And Fingolfin's idea is, no, let's not, because obviously they don't, and Fingolfin's High King, so they have to do what Fingolfin does.
Right.
That's the point. So we needed Maedhros to want something that he was incapable of doing himself. Because if he was completely battle ready in episode 3, then it would be more likely that Fingolfin's reaction would be like, knock yourself out, dude, have fun.
Right, exactly.
Whereas what he's saying is, we should all go fight Morgoth, and by all of us, I mean all of you. And
right.
So Maedhros knows that he doesn't have the personal ability to follow through with that goal yet, and that's what he's working towards in episode 4. So we needed that arc to last from his rescue in episode 1 until his training montage in episode 4. I certainly agree there could be changes in how the physical recovery works, but he needed to be not battle ready in episode 3 for plot reasons.
Right. That I can understand. That makes sense. And certainly, just as we're showing like, yeah, he can exist, he can survive on, stapled to a cliff with no sustenance for 5 years, has clearly put him outside the range of like normal human issues of injury and recovery, right, and survival. So the fact that he doesn't recover at the rate that a human might recover, not from a similar thing, of course, but from like a parallel or proportional thing. Again, like, it's fine. Like, he survived in a way that was alien to normal human activity. Why should we then necessarily assume that his recovery follows a trajectory that would be something that we would connect to directly?
There are examples of real life long-term recovery.
Oh, absolutely.
For instance, victims of Holocaust camps might have been in the hospital for a year afterwards, recuperating, so to speak.
Right.
So and kids who grew up in refugee camps and lived through starvation and stuff have very serious long-term effects.
Sure.
Physical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
not to mention, Celebrian went through a similar experience and wound up having to go to the Undying Lands immediately after. So, like, elves are extremely resistant to death from that kind of trauma, but that doesn't mean that they're able to come back. Like, they don't necessarily bounce back, because, like, we would have been dead day 3, right?
Right. Yeah.
And if we were grabbed on day 2, then maybe we'd be in the hospital for like a month recovering from that, right? Whereas he lasts for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? So when you think you're proportionally, it makes kind of sense.
It does, though. I guess it's not that I don't understand all that. I do. But there's another way to think about the proportions, right? That is to say, somebody who can survive without food and water for 5 years seems like he should be snapping back faster than this. That's the thing that I found kept going on in the back of my head as I was reading it. Right. I'm like, look, if he is like so superhuman as this, then like, again, it could, if it were me, and assuming it, even they were feeding me for 5 years or whatever, I might take even longer, sure. But again, I wouldn't have survived 5 years without food and water. So my own experience and projections wouldn't be a guide. One of the things that I'm wondering here, is there a way that we could convey more clearly, Nick, what you were hinting at, right? That is, it's not just about the body, it's about the spirit as well for elves, and if this is connected, of course, to the way in which elves can die of grief, right?
Right.
The way in which Feanor's spirit burned itself out and cremated his body on the spot, right? Why, why are those things? What do we see in those things? So what I'm wondering is with, I guess,
well, you could say that elves' bodies are sustained by their spirit in a way that ours are not. And so when Mithras is up there, right? Like, his body is surviving, but his body is essentially eating away his spirit to keep the body alive. And so when he's recovering, the way that he's recovering, like, his spirit has to heal in order for his body to be able to heal. Right. And so that might be something we could say more clearly.
Well, one thing that I do have him say is in episode 1, he doesn't say, I've just survived here for so long without eating. He says that Morgoth's power is what's sustaining him. Because, like, Fingin asked him, he's like, how did you survive? And he's like, it's Morgoth's power somehow, even though I'm really hungry and thirsty all the time, somehow I'm not dying. So I think that if Morgoth was not directly involved in keeping Mithras alive in order to torture him, he would have just died. So I think if we want to extrapolate from that, we could say that somehow the way that Morgoth was keeping him alive has made it more difficult for him to get out of this state.
Maybe
Something
like the orc drafts, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And that could be,
Or the ring wraith's rings is probably a closer analogy.
Yeah.
He's like butter scraped over too much bread.
Yeah. I mean, it would be actually I kind of like I kind of like the orc drafts thing in a sense. Because so actually that's much more interesting. That is, I think that's more. It would be great to see more of that, I think, because shouldn't somebody ask the question, is Mithras okay? Right, like he's alive and that's cool and everything, but has he been tainted by Morgoth? I mean, Morgoth, like, so what happened? Like Morgoth again, I'm imagining other characters saying this, like, so hang on, so Mithras survived because he was sustained by the spirit of Morgoth, so like this Morgoth has touched him in this way. Like, is he different? Is he the same as he was? Is he? And we could even use this as a kind of a foreshadowing of the spell of bottomless dread that we're going to get later on, right? Them wondering about the long-term effects on Mithras and his character. And I would think that maybe
Mithras needs an immediate shower upon his return.
Well, what would he need? I mean, he would need... What kind of impact would it have on his spirit? On the one hand, we can see the hopelessness that he was experiencing with Fingon, right? When he was on the cliffside, right, is one way that we can sort of show. That is certainly the end state that Morgoth was shooting for, right? That's what he was wanting to inspire, I would think, in Mithras. In other words, so you could say that in a sense he was under Morgoth's influence, right? His spirit has been, while his body is sustained, his spirit is suppressed, or diseased, even in a sense, by Morgoth. I don't want to say corrupted, because corrupted implies his own will being corrupted, and his will hasn't been corrupted. But mightn't somebody ask that question? Has his will been corrupted? Mightn't even Curufin maybe ask that question in episode 3 after the abdication?
Yeah, because he's got to be asking himself some questions as to what, like, because this doesn't seem like the same guy.
Right.
And he doesn't. Like, even when he recovers, he's not the same guy.
Yeah. He has changed, and I would think that, his brothers would potentially worry about what caused that change.
Right. And Fingon would be the other one that I would think would be thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Fingon wants to make sure that what he brought back was Mithras.
To make sure, I mean, to put it very bluntly, to make sure he made the right call when he didn't shoot him. Right? I mean, he could even question, on some level at least, he could question, would that in fact have been the best thing to it? Would that have been have I done Mithras a favor, in bringing him back? His spirit
probably didn't think so initially, I imagine.
Right, exactly. Mithras, I mean, we know, like, on the cliff face, Mithras didn't think so, right? That's not what he was asking for. He was asking for death.
If we were telling a different... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
If we were telling a different story, like a slightly different kind of story, we could have said that Mithras abdicated the crown specifically because he felt so hopeless. He felt like, I don't think that's the story that we're trying to tell, but we certainly could have told it that way. If we
yes, I agree. That's not, I mean, the chain, we want to make sure that it is clear that his abdication is a positive, not a negative step. This is not him being apathetic or him being hopeless or anything like that, or him being corrupted, or even him just feeling inadequate and weak, right? He is making a positive step. He is taking, in fact, a strong and courageous action despite his own weakness, despite his continued suffering. But
in that case, it might be best for them not to question, has he been somehow tainted by Morgoth by his time on the cliff? We want to focus on, this is definitely Mithras that has come back and is abdicating. we shouldn't say, well, is it Mithros with some of Morgoth's spirit still in him that's doing the abdication?
Right.
Like, I don't think there should be any question in there, and I think if we don't bring it up at all, the viewers won't jump to that conclusion.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Though again,
I think if
go ahead, Nick.
I think that if Fingon is the one asking that question, then yes, I think that causes that problem. I'm less concerned about his brothers asking the question.
And that's what I was going to say. I think it's hard for me to I mean, the more I think about this, I'm like, Corofin totally would ask that question, wouldn't he? I mean,
if not Corofin, Amras.
Right.
Because Amras was the one who trusted Mithros the most before his capture. And if he came back and did this, Amras might be trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah. Through Amras, I think is the way that we could bring this in, like on a more purely personal level, right? Mm-hmm. Like if Amras is asking or questioning, the motivation, it seems, would be like, brother mine, are you okay? Right? Whereas Corofin, his questions are more politically motivated, right? His questioning would be more politically motivated. I would think, I agree with you, Nick. It is conceivable that Fingon could have some concerns, but he should not doubt Mithros. I think that his and he should certainly perceive the significance, the real meaning of the abdication and what lay behind it. I'm wondering, could the
if we are going to add someone questioning this about Mithros, we should probably try to somehow work it into one of our existing scenes or replace the existing scene with it rather than adding a scene.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah.
The best place I've thought for it to go would be the scene with Maglor when Mithros is laying in bed and like he gets Maglor to come in and Maglor is like singing a song for him.
Yes.
If Maglor could be the one who is concerned about Mithros' health and makes some kind of, because maybe Maglor like perceives somehow that there might be some taint of Morgoth on him, and he's like, "Good for you, Mithros. You are healing from that taint of Morgoth."
Right.
Like when Mithros appears to be hopeful at the end of that scene.
Do we have how much self-doubt does Mithros experience? Do we think?
Well, here's the thing. The thing is that he is going.
I love Marie's laugh in the background. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, he's the least doubting of their purpose and whatnot moving forward. So if we wanted to show him struggling with self-doubt, then we would need some sort of incident to take place to kind of alleviate that. And I don't know that in our story economy at this point, I mean, maybe we could find something in there to do that with, but
well, my thought about that is that because you're right. I mean, we do not want self-doubt to be a major part of his character profile moving forward at all. But if he has it now, like when he's still bedridden at the beginning would be when he would have it, right? And he would get over that. And in fact, we could even, if we had a moment like that, if he's wondering, okay, I never thought I would live. I thought I was going to be there forever. I was, now I'm back, and now what next? Now what happens? And so the question, like, can I lead my brothers as I have before? Can I lead everybody? Is that what's, am I fit to do that? It's got to be a question that's going to come up then, while he's still weak, while his recovery may be even in a sense still in doubt, right?
So maybe like in the scene where he's with Maglor and they go out and they greet the crowd like outside his tent in the camp. What I have them doing there is Maglor's like handing off the crown. He puts it on Mithros, and Mithros steps out, and everybody's super happy to see him. And I had Mithros like look at Maglor a little bit surprised, like, why are they so happy to see me?
Right.
The only concern I have there is that doing so touches the abdication. Like, you'd have to be very careful. Like, if you wanted to avoid any perception that he's abdicating because he's not sure that he's the right guy for the job.
Out of self-doubt. No, exactly. There would have to be then a following scene which shows his resolve, right? To me, especially given the fact that Maedhros's weakness remains such a factor, not only through episode 2, but through episode 3 as well. It's still such a factor that I think that it's something that we can't say. Rhiannon, thinking back to what you were saying before, I don't think that we can trust our audience not to ask that question, not to wonder about that if we don't. Now, would they specifically wonder about like taint from Morgoth and whether he's corrupted and compromised morally or in his will? They might not necessarily ask that if we don't plant that, but some kind of I guess this is the other thing.
This is why you have focus groups, so you can figure out whether or not that's going to happen before
exactly
you send this out.
Here's the other thing. So Nick, you brought up Celebrian, and in my mind, I do think that Celebrian is a really interesting pairing with Maedhros, right? I mean, in that both of them experience a very significant trauma, right? Both of them are changed by that trauma, but they respond to that trauma very differently, right? And that difference is something that I think we could emphasize even more with Maedhros. The way that Maedhros, because, and Nick, I was thinking of this even when we were talking about what happens with his spirit as Morgoth is sustaining his body and as he is sustaining himself through the experience that his spirit is, you described his spirit being spent, right, during that time. Or the fire is burning in him so like hotter and hotter and hotter, so that he makes it through.
And the thing with Maedhros is he's just such a mission-focused guy.
Yeah,
he is so certain that he came down off that mountain to fight Morgoth.
Yes,
right.
And he never doubts that.
Exactly.
He knows that he wasn't supposed to survive. But his conclusion is, and therefore, since I did, it is my fate to carry on this war. So he's not, maybe, I don't know whether or not he would have personal doubts, but he never has any doubt that there was a reason he lived and he's going to do something with it.
Yeah.
And what he's going to do with it is very oath related.
Right. No, I agree. So, yeah, exactly. My thought there is that the moment of doubt is it's just about his own weakness. Right? It's not about doubt of like, what should I do? Exactly as you say. I think that maybe when he's lying there in bed, he does have a doubt of like, can I do am I good for anything anymore? Am I going to be able to, like, I see, like, I know what I want to do, right? But can I do it, and how can we do it? How can I do it? How can we do it? I mean, there's a way in which he could even see, and again, this doesn't come out explicitly, but he could even see his own physical weakness, his own physical and spiritual weakness in his time of recovery. Could even be kind of mapped onto, symbolically mapped onto the division of the Noldor, like the weakness of the Noldor. They are in no fit state either. Neither one of them, neither the Noldor as a group or he himself are in any fit state to go attack Morgoth right now, right? But so he would perceive that, right? But rather than he does not despair. Right. Instead, the fire of his spirit burns even hotter within him, and he drives himself to recover, both physically and spiritually, and to take the action that he sees to be necessary in order to bring the Noldor together and forge them into a weapon to use against Morgoth. Right. And that's the abdication.
I would say that that's definitely a thing that could be done. It would require giving Maedhros a lot more screen time than we gave him in that episode, as far as I'm aware. Which, I mean, it's fine. It's a thing that can be done. It's just, it would require some, like, because we would have to invent something to kind of bring him out of that. Like, something would have to actually happen, to visibly see that.
Because Mythos isn't going to, like, have a soliloquy where he talks about how he feels that he is weak and the Noldor are weak, and so he has to do something about this. And then
over the course of his speech, he comes to a realization.
Happens. Like, it's his decision, and nobody knows about it. It's a complete surprise to the audience, to his brothers, to Fingolfin, to his people, to everyone.
Right.
Until he, like, actually takes off the crown at the end.
Right. Agreed about the surprise, and that's okay. But see, Nick, I'm not sure I agree with you. I think that can happen in the course of the one conversation, right? Because it doesn't have to be, and again, here I think is where I'm agreeing with Maria about Maedhros' character. When I say that he has this moment of doubt, I don't mean that he necessarily has to, like, be in a steady state of self-doubt and then something needs to happen to break him out of that state of doubt. I think it can merely be, I think it needs to be acknowledged, but I think it can merely be, I think it could be like that conversation with Magor, Rhiannon, as you were suggesting, to sort of put some of these new dynamics in that conversation, which of course the moment when he is then going out of the tent and being, sort of reacclaimed as High King by the other Feanorians, seems to me a very logical culmination. That, like, when he steps out of the tent, see, what I don't want him to be diffident there, right? He should have his decision made. He hasn't said what it is yet, the bigger decision, right? But in the tent, privately, with Maglor, right? Now, he's not going to say this in public. He could express doubts, uncertainties, to say, he can say, he can make it clear that he is determined to fight Morgoth, right? Just as Marie says, that his path is clear to him. His calling, his destiny is plain, right? But he's not sure, like, can I do it? Am I going to be able, and he looks down at his stump, right? And he's like,
the timing for that would have to be the first conversation.
Yes.
Both Maglor and Curufin are in the tent. So the question is, would Maedhros say that in front of Curufin? Because he's not an idiot. Which would be one way of overcoming the self-doubt within the same conversation, because he could be expressing frustration with his brothers running things and being like, well, guess I got to get better because you guys have made a mess of everything.
And that being, like, one of the first scenes in this episode is him taking control of his brothers. Like, he stops Maglor and Curufin from arguing with each other about the events that happened by, like, telling them to stop and exerting his will over them. So he probably, like, if he had a moment of doubt, it probably happened before episode 2 started.
Possibly so. Or again, we could, if we want to just kind of I'm perfectly willing to I'm more willing to let the moment of doubt go than I am willing to compromise his determination. And I think, but I mean, I don't think there's an absolute need to let the moment of doubt go. Even again, if only just a question of, like, him acknowledging the difficulties, right?
I mean, it definitely can be done. It's a question of restructuring some things, moving some things around. But I definitely think it's something that could be done.
But I do think that the attitude towards Maedhros. Okay, here's a way for me to explain the thing that I think would be, when people are looking at Maedhros during his recovery period, right? I think that the question that people should be asking is not whether or not Maedhros is gonna be able to recover. Like, is Maedhros always going to be just a shell of his former self, right? Which is what that seemed to me the subtext of a bunch of people's conversations about Maedhros in the script as is. Like that they were, I mean, we just like conveying their worry about him, their concern for his well-being. That's totally appropriate. But instead of them saying to each other, essentially, gosh, is Maedhros ever going to be more than a shell of himself? It sort of seems to me, if he is as focused and determined as I think he is after his release from the cliffside, I think the question they should be asking each other, if they're worried about him, the direction in which they should be worried is, Maedhros is still sane, right? Like, he's not a little too obsessed.
Full of Fingolfin, is he?
Well, or like, I mean, basically, does he sound a little bit like Captain Ahab? I mean, if anything,
I think he should sound a little bit like Captain Ahab.
Yes, I think he should too. I mean, I think that he should be like absolute, like, I mean, he needs to stop 1 or 2 steps shy of monomaniacal, but like not, he should be in the zip code of monomaniacal. You know, like he totally should, and yes. Like in a good way, in a rational and benevolent way. You know, it's like he doesn't become
in the most rational way one can be monomaniacal.
Exactly, but I mean, really. So I mean, and there are small ways in which I felt that got conveyed when we see like him, his like the training montages and stuff later on, but.
Yeah,
it wasn't.
Again.
It wasn't over the top enough for me.
Yeah. Okay.
In that way.
All right, we can make Maedhros more over the top. No problem.
Maedhros should be more over the top. I mean,
I think I remember asking for that scene to be more over the top.
And the question, even like, I'm trying to think about kind of projecting myself into the perspective of these other characters. If anything, should somebody on, among the on the Fingolfin and Finarfin side, shouldn't somebody be asking the question, so is Maedhros going the same direction as his dad? I mean, like, should somebody toss out the phrase spirit of fire?
Well, Fingolfin does that at the end of their duel, I think, in episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
But he is very much impressed by Maedhros's ability to fight. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the duel, I have him like saying that the fire of your life burns hot within you. And then Maedhros is like concerned for a moment because he's like thinking about Dad and what happened when the fire of his dad's life burned hot within him. And that didn't end up too well for Feanor. But then Fingolfin says, it is a different fire from your father's.
Right.
So he recognizes that Maedhros is fiery and determined and focused like Feanor, but he isn't Feanor.
Right.
It makes me think. I don't know how many people have watched the Firefly show. There's a scene where these 2 guys are captured and they're being tortured, right? And one of them is like an experienced veteran soldier. He's the captain, and he's like the epitomal tough guy, right?
Yes.
And the other guy is the pilot, who's kind of a wimp, and he's kind of getting by on jokes and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But really, the captain is kind of like dragging him back to sanity every once in a while by making him mad, right?
Right.
And when the pilot winds up getting released, right, and the captain's still there being tortured, and the pilot goes back to the ship, and he says to another character, he's crazy. And they think that he's talking about the guy who's torturing them. And he's like, no, the captain is crazy.
Yes.
And like that kind of like single-minded resolution, I think, fits Maedhros very well.
Yes.
Like people should kind of come like if somebody was sparring with him, they should come away with this thought of, this guy's like, I mean, I could wail on this guy all day and he would just keep coming back. It's like there's a scene in Rocky 2 where that guy who's training Apollo Creed says to Apollo Creed, I saw you beat that man like I never saw anyone get beat before, and the man kept coming after you. And that's kind of what Maedhros should be like. Yeah.
I really liked the duel scene. I thought that was really neat. I think I think I did want it to be first of all, I didn't know who was going to win. I really didn't. Like and I'm glad that Fingolfin won, because we need to show Fingolfin being like, powerful,
not getting beaten by a one-handed dude.
Yeah, well, see, but that's the thing. Like Maedhros, Maedhros has got to be a big deal. By the way,
and he gets by there through just sheer ferocity and tenacity. I think is kind of what the situation is. Like Fingolfin's probably physically stronger than Maedhros, but there's a lot to be said for someone who just keeps getting back up
and who has no regard for their own pain and suffering. Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, yeah, that scene is would be, I get really interesting for actors and stunt people to perform, because it really does have to convey, but again, I kind of wonder if there's a moment when Maedhros almost loses control, right? I mean, when he's just, because it's, I mean,
when he almost goes Luke Skywalker on him.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that Maedhros is not absolutely berserker, but like pretty close to berserker, in combat. And if he just kind of flips it at one point, and
there should definitely be at least a moment during that fight scene where the audience is concerned for Fingolfin's personal safety.
Yes.
That should definitely happen.
Yes.
Like, he comes out on top because he's
more skilled and stronger. Yes.
Right. But like there should not be it should not be a foregone conclusion. And maybe at the beginning, people might be thinking, oh, there's no way that Maedhros comes out on top of this. But as things progress, people should start being like, he could win this thing.
Right.
Yeah,
which, and again, I don't think he should look like much of an underdog, really. By the way, when you had him training and we saw, he was like, beating 5 or 6 people. Were you imagining him beating 5 people sequentially or simultaneously?
I was thinking that was going to, like, I was thinking of it like a montage where it was kind of like getting progressive, like the difficulty level was going up over time.
Yeah. Because by the way, totally see Maedhros defeating 5 of his people at once, like 1-on-5.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Maedhros needs to be an absolute maniac on the battlefield. Like he doesn't necessarily have to be the most skilled person, but he is the one that you would want to face least on the battlefield. He needs to be an
orcs fled before his face because he was as one who had returned from the dead.
Exactly, and that is the face that we need to see come out during the fight, right?
The Revenant.
Yeah. This again, like he is in the zip code of like serious disorder, right? Still.
So what you're saying is that the Maedhros of episode 2 is a little bit too tame calm for you, even though he's bedridden. We should see a little bit more sparks of this kind of stuff going on.
Yes. He can't physically do any of this stuff yet, but again, I think if we show his resolve, we need to show the fire of his spirit even when his body is not yet recovered.
And
more of
I
that.
think a lot of that is going to be acting as well.
No question.
It's tough when you're putting a lot of this stuff down. It's tough to explain a lot of this stuff in enough detail where, like, it's absolutely clear to anybody reading it what the situation is, right, and what people are thinking beneath the surface. Because and this isn't even a shooting script.
Right. Yep. No, clearly. Okay, good. Well, so that's we should we should stop because it's getting super late. And
what?
Yeah, exactly. So my apologies for that. Got carried away. Got lost in the scripts as I was when I was reading.
Almost 1 o'clock.
This
happens to us all the time.
Exactly. It's almost 1 o'clock, and we should stop. But we'll pick up here. We've talked about some things from 3 and 4, so we don't have to go through all of them. But let's resume with 3 and 4. Some of the things that we didn't talk about with 3 and 4, and then we'll move on at least. So let's plan to do basically like 3 through 6, and we'll see where we go for next time.
Sounds good.
And next time, of course, is the 17th. Yes, October 17th. So we are, in fact, going 2 weeks from today. So that's good. We're back on our 2-week schedule. So very good. All right, excellent. So more script discussion on October 17th. Thank you guys for joining us, everyone who's listening live, those who are listening after the fact, and of course to our guests who have done all of this wonderful work. This is fantastic. I just cannot express enough how much fun it is to be reading and discussing full film scripts. Thank you for all of the work you guys have been doing, and I'm looking forward to talking about this again in a couple weeks.
Well, before we go, I'd just like to say one thing is that I would not have been able to write these scripts without all the work that everybody who has ever been involved in film has put into this project.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is, the sort of original ideas and concepts that we had of community involvement, in this podcast series that I decided to do. I remember Trish and I discussing that way back wouldn't it be cool if we got like a lot of community involvement and people really contributed? That was, we, would never even have imagined, what has actually come about. So, Rhiannon, you're absolutely right. And thank you again, of course, Rhiannon, for becoming such a big part of that. You are an inspiration, I hope, to others who might be late in finding the project, and rather than feeling daunted because we're already up in season 4, caught up and jumped in, and you've become such an important part of this project during this season. So I'm so glad that you jumped in like that.
Thank you. Me too.
And of course, to Nick and Marie for sticking around through the whole time too. Yeah, that's also appreciated. Don't want to underplay that.
They're
awesome.
Okay.
Thank you guys. Look forward to more scripts and more discussion next time. So we'll say thanks for listening and Godspeed. Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.